Have you any hobbies?
My hobbies are fast cars and fast women.
Hobbies are healthy. They teach you things.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Welcome in, everybody, to the Around the UFL interview series. James Arson here at Pro Football Newsroom, and I'm really excited to welcome in Corey Chamblin, defensive coordinator for the Birmingham Stallions, three-time USFL, UFL champions. Corey, how are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good, man. How about you?
Doing really well. Excited to have you here. Appreciate you joining us. We got a lot to talk about, a lot to go over, as you've really been, like we said, well-traveled in this spring football space. But before we get to all that, I want to ask you, how's this offseason been treating you so far?
It's been pretty good. I'm out here in Phoenix now. We did have a high of 117 one day, and then the car was like 130. So other than that, waiting on that fall weather to roll around. But it's pretty good. Didn't end the season the way we wanted to, but that's a part of life. And just digging into some football, looking at all these football games and studying and getting ready to move forward.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to get into, and like you said, didn't end the season on the note that you would have liked, but still a lot of positive to take away from Birmingham in 2025. And, you have been all over the place in your coaching career when it comes to being overseas in Europe. You were a head coach in the CFL with Toronto and Saskatchewan, I believe is how you pronounce it. You've been, DB's coach around the block as well, and of course in the spring season in the America the last few years. I want to just dive right into it when, Birmingham. How did you and Skip Holtz kind of get connected for that first year in the USFL with the Stallions?
It's funny. I coached in Arkansas Razorbacks with the Razorbacks in the SEC with John Chavis for a year. I was one of their analysts, and the DB coach was Ron Cooper. And I can remember Ron Cooper called me on the way back from a tournament with my kids in Vegas, and he's like, "All right, you're interested in coaching the USFL?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Where's it located?" He's like, "Birmingham." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's real cool. I'm from Birmingham." So, it kind of worked out. But I remember Skip calling, and Skip's like, "Hey, this scene is new to me. I've interviewed 5 guys, and they're all interviewing for the same job in the NFL. Would you take it?" And, I was just previous off being a head coach in Toronto. So I was like, yeah, this is good. It was an entry for me into the U.S. ball, again, besides being in Arkansas, and it was pro ball in the U.S. So, I was excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, for that opportunity to come around, and like you said, I didn't know. So you grew up in Birmingham, or you're from that area?
I'm a Birmingham native. I'm
Look
a
at
Birmingham
that.
native. Oh, yeah. So my mom, she gets to come to all the games. So she definitely didn't want it to move. I know we weren't going to talk about it, but she definitely wanted Birmingham to stay because she could drive to the games. It's about 20 minutes from her home. And, it was just a godsend in 22 hours there. Then I left for a season, then came back. So it's been real good for us.
Yeah.
Good for her. My sister's there. My brother's there. My family had come from Phoenix out to see them. So, we make it a yearly trip for one of those games, and it just fits our family style right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some Birmingham ties on that staff. I know Derek Riley, the linebackers coach. I believe he was coach at UAB previously as well. So that's really, really neat to see. But, I want to jump right into it with this 2022 season. You join Skip Holtz's staff, and obviously you go on this legendary historic run. You only lose one game the whole year. you win the inaugural championship. As DB's coach, what was that process like, kind of getting adjusted back to the spring scene, and what were some of your takeaways from that season?
For me, the adjustment was fairly easy because at the time it was similar to the CFL. Smaller league, not the NFL. You're dealing with a different level of guys who hadn't made it. At that point, guys hadn't been on practice squads. I can remember we flew down to Skips in Tampa or below Tampa and watching film on guys. And at that point, it was YouTube. There was a lot of different things. Guys have been out for a while. I remember that league starting, the rosters weren't expanded. So the guys were gassed after kickoff. So there were a lot of adjustments, the TV time. So it was new for the league. It was new for all of us. And I think, we just weathered the storm. Skip gave us a plan. We followed that plan. And, it was good for us. It was good for us from, beginning to the end.
You guys had some really solid players in that team, obviously, hence why you won the championship. But looking at that secondary, guys like Brian Allen, he was a big piece for you. Lorenzo Burns, Christian McFarland had a big interception in the championship game. Can you talk a little bit about that room and what it was like coaching some of those guys?
You know what? Those guys were, it was pretty good to coach those guys. I can go through each one and just talk about them. It was unique for them. I can remember drafting Lorenzo Burns, saying that he'd be a good nickel for us, and he was. He ended up getting, that tryout in the NFL, and then he's in the CFL. Brian Allen was a tall corner. He ended up getting his shot, Tyree Robinson. C-Mac, unfortunately, he never got that NFL shot, but, I think he was from Idaho State, one of those schools, Idaho, I believe. And for him, it was just a good opportunity for him to, get some pro film and to say that he's played pro football. Like I said, it was a number of guys that played that it was exciting to have him. And, don't forget, you missed one. You missed the key component. The guy that I probably drafted last, and I think she let me know that, is JoJo Tillery. So JoJo was on that inaugural team, and he's still around.
I was going to get to JoJo. I was going to get to him, one of the OGs that stuck around. Him. J. Moore's back. We've seen Marlon Williams on offense still doing his thing. DeMarcus Gates is still out there playing at a high level. But speaking of linebackers, I am repping Shark Dog today, so it'd be remiss of me not to ask about that championship game. Go back and forth from Philadelphia. I was there in person. That was actually the first USFL game I got to cover as a journalist. But that pick six, that moment for him to come in with that play at that moment. Take me through the emotions that you guys are feeling on the sidelines and up in the booth.
You know what? Just even before that, though, and I hope Scooby sees this, and Scooby are always in contact. His hands were sus, but he started working tennis ball drills because he saw the DBs working them. And he's like, hey, I need to do that. And it was probably about 4 weeks before that he really dove into it and said, I'm going to start doing it. And he started focusing. And it was amazing when he got the pick, and then he picked sixed it. I think he even blew out a hamstring. I don't know what he did, but
he did.
But that was Shark Dog, and that was the type of emotion, because really, if you look at that squad there was a lot of guys who had been on the street, a lot of guys who had no hope. Hope was gone because there wasn't, besides the CFL, in the spring league, there wasn't a big jump for guys going back to the NFL or guys being able to play at a high level like they did coming out. So, that play kind of sums up the whole season of lay it on the line. You don't know when's going to be your next time for you to actually play this game. So that's kind of what what we went through, that emotion with Scooby and Shark Dog is, he led us to that victory. And, you always remember that.
Yeah, that was a game to remember, no doubt. Really set the tone for what spring football would look like the next few years, Birmingham being the dynasty that it is. But, speaking of making jumps, some guys went from the UFL to the NFL. Some guys from the USFL to the NFL. Some guys went from the USFL to the XFL, including yourself. We saw you make the move over to San Antonio with Hines Ward and that Brahmas team, and kind of was curious, just get your thoughts on how that process unfolded and what went into the decision to jump over to the XFL.
Well, actually, there's a couple of things. First, Will Lewis, who, he's back in our league now. Will, back in the early days, tried to bring me to Seattle as a player, 99, 2000. It didn't work. And then, 2022, I get a call, and he's like, hey, would you be interested in joining the XFL? Bill ended up joining as well, Bill Johnson, who's now with the Bears. But, spoke to him, spoke to Hines, and it was a good opportunity, because I worked with Coach Chavis, who had been, real good in the college scene, but it was a chance to work with Jim Herman, who was a coordinator at Michigan back in the day during that national championship. He's been in the NFL as well, and also with Hines. And also the season was different too. It was a little earlier, so I had to, I was able to get on earlier vacation. I'm not gonna lie, but it was just the experience of working with those guys. The level of like you said, I've been around, and a lot of the things with me is who can I learn from? What will help me to ascend to my next level and be great when I get there. And Jim was some of the things that Jim Herman taught me was some of the things that we ended up winning that championship with. The last championship in 2024 was the things that I learned while I was with him. So, so that was pretty good. You always want to be able to learn from people. So that was a good environment for me to learn. We had one of the top defenses, throughout that campaign. It didn't show for us as a team, but, we learned a lot of lessons, and we put that league together. So for me, that was, James, really 2 times that we had built teams from the ground up. And I've done that as a head coach. I've done it as a coordinator, and to be able to do it here. So for me, that's kind of something that I put in my pocket is, hey, I know how to build those teams from the ground up because I've had that experience. So it always excites me when that experience comes around for that opportunity.
No, absolutely. And before we get to breaking down a bit of the Brahmas roster, I wanted to ask about, you mentioned Jim Herman, right? I mean, he was a DC there in San Antonio. I believe after the fact, he went over to the ELF. So, Europe, familiar territory for you. But you've been a part of John Chavis' defenses. You've been a part of Jim Herman the last couple of years, 2 defenses that have been successful in spring ball. What were some of the main differences you noticed between being a part of both those staffs and kind of the things you learned along the way that I guess you kind of talked about that you were able to bring back into your defensive coordinating position?
Well, the biggest thing is, Jim was more single high, and John was more too high. He likes the Florida of the Palms, which we still play. So it was a mix of some of those things. Jim was cover 1, but more so cover 3. He had a 3 background. I had a little less 3 background. I had a little bit more of the Palms background, cover 0 background. So it was able to help me to mesh those things. And that's the biggest thing is like, okay, how are they playing in the NFL? How are they playing in pro ball, not just college ball? Because the hash has changed, so that was the other thing as well, coming to pro ball in the U.S. with the hashes, because now you have a difference in the college hash and the pro hash. So it was like, okay, what are we calling? How are we calling it? So really to, put those 2 together and understand how to call a game based off of pro football and making those schemes both pop, whether they were using college or whether they were using the pro ball.
And you talked about building these teams from the ground up, and in San Antonio, you guys had a really solid defense that year. I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough because obviously the season didn't go the way Hines Ward and you guys had planned, but it reminds me a little bit of what the Memphis Showboats were this past season in the UFL, where you had a really strong defense that really kind of kept the glue together for the team, gave them a chance to win games. But because of the coaching turnover, because of the offense just not finding stability at quarterback, kind of not able to get into a groove throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, without doubt, and I've been in several situations like that, even as a head coach. When that quarterback goes down and you got musical chairs with the quarterbacks, you better have a strong defense. That's the only thing that's going to give you a chance and give those guys a chance to settle in. I know some guys, like say, oh, the defense is simple, just go get them. No, not really. We have our complexity as well. But, once we get the guys going and settle them down, and those guys, they start with a lot of volume on offense. I don't care where you are, for those guys. And especially when you change quarterbacks, it's kind of hard for them to get into a rhythm and a groove, So defense, once you get into it, there's minor tweaks instead of changes that we can move forward with that gives teams a chance. And that's always been our philosophy defensively, whether it's with John Chavis or whether with Jim Herman is, hey, let's give them a chance. And, and I talked to Skip about this. That first year, I tell him that was a defensive championship. And then some, the next year was probably offense and, a little bit of both that next year. But there are times when you want to be the strong part of the team, as a defense. That's a mindset. Not that you want the other part to be weak, but they're scoring 20, 30 points, then that's even better. But you want to make sure that you're not, a weak point on being on the defensive side. So, like I said, you want to be strong on both sides, get offensive chance to move forward.
Yeah, and looking at that defense, I was looking back at the roster earlier today and just kind of seeing some of the names like Luke Barku, a guy who went to the NFL, and he has such a good season. I mean, that defensive back room that you had, Ranthony Texada, Jack Kerner with that huge hit he had as Kyle Sloter that, every so often I just go ahead and replay that one because that was electric. But, that entire room, what was it like kind of coaching some of those guys and seeing them move on to the NFL and have some success?
I Googled Luke last night to see where he's at, just to check up on him because I do. Those guys were good. Those are guys I wish would have got a true NFL shot. Texada, he already knew that he was going to go into coaching. I think he's high school coaching down in the Dallas area. If he's not, I knew he went to TCU. But, Luke and those guys are still trying to do it. Jack
Luke was
went
just
over.
with the Lions.
He was with the Lions, yep, in this preseason. He's with the Cowboys, then the Lions. And then you have Jack, who went over to Europe for a little while to play with Jim. I don't think he did this past season. But there were a number of guys in that back end, the way they played. They were pros. It was exciting, to coach them, just because Ryan Lewis, I think he coaches at a smaller school in North Colorado. So it was good to have those guys. They were pros, and that's a good thing is that crew was a little bit different from the first crew that we had in Birmingham because these were guys off of practice squads and they had, they were a little bit fresher or coming off of a practice squad or out of football. So, they were a little bit different to where they still believed they could make it and they had a little different juice the way they approached the season.
Yeah, one play that comes to mind is Tani Adewusi's game-winning pick against Arlington. I think it was Week 6. But I always thought that was an interesting storyline because he was with the Renegades in 2020, and they opted not to bring him back, and he ends up in San Antonio. And that spring football to me is so cool because you kind of see these storylines of guys that hop around from different teams, and once they get an opportunity, they make the most of it. And speaking of opportunities, the spring football scene, it's always been kind of, as you've can kind of see over the last month, things change very quickly, right? And all of a sudden, the UFL and the XFL, they decide to merge, and that was a long process. And all of a sudden, it looks like San Antonio is going to stick, and then Hines Ward decides to walk away, and you're left without a team. And then you end up back in Birmingham. Can you kind of take me through what that whole process was like for you and kind of about, I'm sure emotions were kind of high and low and just trying to keep yourself grounded throughout that entire process.
Yeah, Skip and I stayed in contact, and like I told Skip, it was nothing about his staff or the way he ran things. At that time, the XFL presented a better opportunity for coaches like myself, in a lot of different ways. Now that they merged the leagues, then the opportunity is where it needs to be. But you go through that with Hines. He's out of Arizona State now. I see him every so often, but the thing about that is just the emotions of, okay, here it is. I'm in this league. We want to build this, and then some changes happen. It was yeah. So so it's I'm reading the comments as they go by. So that. So but that the emotions were there. Because you got to change back to where you just came from. But the biggest emotion was like, okay, was Bill going to be there? And then Bill said, hey, I'm going back as well. So I ended up back with Bill Johnson. And we were able to connect. We've always been close that way. And then this past year he was gone. But that was the biggest thing is, it was good for us because what happened when they brought the league, the UFL, and everybody moved the hub to Texas, well, Bill and I were familiar with everything. We were so familiar. We were like, yeah, we were just here. Whereas the rest of the staff's like, what do we do here? We're like, yeah, we practice over here, go over here, eat here, live here. So it actually, helped us. And I remember Skip saying, hey, you guys are back. We were like, oh, we never left. We went to do some recon. We knew the league was moving. So that's what it was.
You guys were one step ahead. Yeah,
we were one step ahead. We were like, we're good. We won it. We're like, we told you. We already knew. That's what it was.
No, there you go. And I might as well jump into it really quick about the hub. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that since you were there in the XFL, now the UFL the last couple of years. Feels like, obviously at some point it'd be nice for teams to be in markets and, to do a little bit more local marketing and things like that. But for the teams, for the players to kind of have this central hub in Arlington where you have so much access to so many different things and facilities, how convenient is that for a coach like you where you have access to all 8 teams at your fingertips?
Yeah, it's very convenient. I've been a part of the hub when it was in Birmingham and we were all in the Sheraton. That was new for us. And then I've been a part of the hubs that have been in Texas. You would like to get the teams in market. We understand that there's a process with that and the way they're going to do that. But I think it helps build, it builds the consistency of the coaching, the players, the league and everything that we're doing. And, it's really like league run. They're doing a ton of good things in terms of with the facilities that we're having, to meet, so those things are good there. But yeah, you always want to get into your market, but, and I read, they were talking about maybe getting us there earlier during the week, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, as long as the league continues to grow, they understand financially what needs to happen for us to be strong before we disperse into those markets. So you have to realize that as well. But, it's always good to be in Texas. because it's a short flight to Birmingham. That's the biggest thing. But like I said, the access is there. You get to see the other coaches on a daily basis, and it's really just like a family atmosphere.
Most definitely, and obviously, the most important thing is let's hope this league can stick. For these guys to get opportunities. We've seen so many of your defensive players get opportunities in the NFL the last couple of years. I mean, a couple of edge rushers like DeAndre Tillman out there with the Broncos. We got Ronnie Perkins back with the Falcons on their practice squad. Like lots of guys getting opportunities to shine. And I want to talk to a little bit about getting back to Birmingham, adjusting in as DB's coach, and then all of a sudden, midway through the 2024 season, there's a bit of John Chavis is dealing with health issues. You kind of have to take over as DC, and then Chavis doesn't return. Could you kind of take me through what that process was like for you, and was it something that you expected to have happen, or did it just kind of come out of nowhere and fall into your lap?
You know what? It's a little bit of both. When I returned with Skip, I let him know that, hey, I've been the DB's coach, and I'm okay with that role. When my time comes, I'll be ready to be the defensive coordinator, whether it's with this organization or somewhere else. And, that was a shock what happened, during the course of that season. And I think we played Houston, and that was the craziest game ever. And I'm like, oh, wow. And then coach comes back, and then he doesn't come back. So, we went to where, the defense, it didn't have a major slide. We may give them up 20-something points and then 18 points. But, I had to adjust everything. We had to get adjusted. It wasn't just me. It was myself, Derek. It was also Bill, because we had to change our roles, because that was an increased role for me. And what happened actually was, it was new, because we were used to being a 4-man gang to a 3-man. Then we brought Anthony Blevins in that put us back to a 4-man. So the responsibilities kind of were ironed out there, and we went back to doing the things that we were normally doing in our winning ways. But emotionally, that was something, because nobody expected it. You can't call a game the way someone else calls it. You don't see the game. You see it similar, and then the players have to get used to you. The coaches have to get used to you, how you do things. So there was a transition period there. And, fortunately for us, we ended up getting it done and winning 25-0. So, there was some emotions in that for sure. But, we got the best out of that squad.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a bit on that kind of halfway through the season where towards the end of the season, you did see a bit of a slump, right? Because lots of adjustments being made. I remember Mondre Harper, I think, was on, it might have been week 10 against Michigan, where he was like, we just need to lock in. Like, we just need to, start executing. Like, it's not like there's anything wrong with the game plan. We just got to, we need some time to figure things out. And the next thing you know, that playoff game against Michigan, they score 18 points. But, a lot of that came off of turnovers offensively. You really were able to hold them to a few field goals. And the shutout against San Antonio, what were you most pleased with through those final couple weeks of the season?
When you look at the final couple of weeks of the season, those guys, they did tune in. We didn't finish that last game. Michigan came with a great game plan. They changed up some things, but, Perkins, I don't know if he's stuck or didn't stick in the NFL, but he should be on somebody's practice squad. But, the thing about those guys toward the end, they always found a way. That's the one thing I'll tell you. This crew this year was a little different than the last crew, because we did have some guys that went to the NFL, some guys that hung around. We had transition this year that nobody really talked about, but, Bill did leave and go to the NFL. Bill and I have had a good long working relationship on how we saw things. So, had to work with Ron a little bit and kind of say, okay, here's how we're doing things in pro ball. Like anything else, you could be around ball your whole life, but you're going from coaching young men to grown men, and here's the new schemes that they're doing. So there was a little bit of work there transition wise, but I thought the guys caught on. I just thought in some areas we probably weren't as strong as we were in the past. And, we had to do some different things, whereas, there had to be more scheme. There was a little bit more scheme in that 25-0. We were in like 3-4 plays, and we just dominated, and like I said, there were some guys that left, some guys that were trying to figure out how we play, and they played a little different. But other than that, we still did well enough to get to that point. It's just in those games, those guys have been championship minded, because we had a great nucleus that had come from the 22 to 23 squad,
right?
To see it in 24. And I think there was probably less of those guys to see it in 25. And it's not just going to happen because you won one doesn't mean you win two. Because you win two doesn't mean you're going to win three. And because you win three, you're darn sure doesn't mean you're going to win four. So there's some things that had to be adjusted there.
No, absolutely. And you kind of started talking about what my next question was going to be like about returning in 2025 as a DC. And like you said, a lot of guys went to the NFL. You lost a couple of your edge rushers and Jonathan Garvin and DeAndre Tillman who went to the NFL. A couple of cornerbacks didn't return. You had some turnover. And even in the linebacker core where you really went to more of a rotational role for some of these guys where Chappelle Russell, Kaya Vittazino, DeMarcus Gates, and Tay Crowder, Mr. Irrelevant, these guys, they all are starters, capable of being starters in this league. How do you kind of manage a situation like that where you're trying to make sure these guys get reps, you're trying to keep everyone on the same page, but also it's like, man, I've got so much talent here, like I got to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, how to manage those egos. And it's not really just ego. Some of it is ego, but, because, hey, I want to be the leading tackler. But, the things I tell them, it's not about plays played, it's about plays made. And, you have to look at that. If I see someone that plays 40 plays and they've only been effective on 3, then what the hell you were doing the other 37 plays? So you need to be able to, so with the rotation, those guys were still effective, and I'm sure they wanted to play more, but with that group, the selling point also was like, hey, you want to stay fresh. So when the NFL calls you, you have a shot and you're not worn out, and some things didn't happen for those guys, but they probably wanted to see a little bit more increased role. But when you have that much talent, no one's going to sit. No one's coming to that league to sit. It's not the NFL to where you're here and I'm here. It's, hey, we're in the UFL. We're all here and we all can go play for one of those 32 teams. So you have to make sure that they get in that film. That's the responsibility that you have when you bring them in, but you also have a responsibility to the team to play the best guys.
Another factor this year for Birmingham was injuries, right? I mean, you look at up front, I mean, you had multiple guys go down. You had guys go down the secondary. You just across the board, I felt like it was almost every week we saw somebody place an IR or just was inactive. For you as a coach, we're like, thankfully you've got a great GM in place now with Paul Roel, who's able to bring, I mean, Max Roberts came in and looked good in the couple games that he played. Steve Linton came in and had played some quality minutes for you guys down the stretch. But, to constantly see that turnover, how do you kind of try to manage that and make sure those guys get up to speed as quickly as possible with playoffs approaching?
That was a challenge, because we wanted to keep it super simple for those guys. And that's another thing also going into that Michigan game. I think we got Bradley back, but he hadn't played, just really just the chemistry. Chemistry is a factor within everything. People don't understand that the chemistry and the continuity when those guys play together and they understand how to play off of each other. That's something that, that's something that you can't just talk about. You have to have the reps to be able to do it. So it had its challenge offensively. It had its challenge defensively. So there were challenges. And like I said, each week we plug someone in. And if I had to adjust the scheme, that's what I'm saying. We did more schematics to adjust for the personnel, not because there were lack thereof, just because, oh, here's a new guy. You hadn't played. Oh, come on in. Hey, let's dial this back for you. And hopefully by the playoffs, we can move back forward.
We had a question in here, which actually I was going to ask something similar, so we'll go right ahead with from Christian Pierce about Coach. How are you handling the UFL free agents this year? And obviously, Paul Rell plays a role in that as the general manager. Skip Holtz plays a role in the player acquisition. But what's kind of your role and your relationship with Roel and Holtz in deciding, okay, I want to see these guys come back this season, or hey, Roel reaches out to you like, here's a couple guys I'm eyeing, here's their tape. Like, what does that process look like for you in the offseason?
I have a weekly phone call with Paul in terms of the defensive side, and when he goes to Skip, he takes that to Skip, and Skip's either approves it or not approves it. So when they talk, just to keep it, from that standpoint is, Paul and I, it's not whether. With me, it's more so, hey, what do we want to build? Skip's not trying to hear, okay, his vertical, his height. He's not going to spend a lot of time with that.
Yeah.
That's us is like, hey, if we can put him in a 3-4, if we can do this, if we can drop him and do all those things. So Paul and I have those conversations. We actually have one tomorrow. So we go through that weekly in terms of, hey, who do we want to bring back? What are we trying to do this year? How are we trying to do it? And he'll send a guy to me from the NFL. There's a guy he sent to me last week, and I said, I'm going to have to scheme him. And he's like, well, we don't want him then. I'm going to have to do some things for him. Now, he's an NFL player, but it's like, okay, is he natural at doing this? No, then I'm going to have to scheme him. That's why they're using him like that. Okay, so that'll kind of bend some of the things we're doing. And he's like, okay, what about this guy? Okay, he fits exactly what we're doing. So, so it's some of those, if we can get those type of guys that fit into what we're doing and what we want to evolve to, then we take them. If not, then we have to have a discussion on them and say, hey, let's wait on them.
And I'm sure that's what makes spring football such a unique ecosystem in the sense that a lot of time, like you said, you built two teams from the ground up. Now you finally have an opportunity in Birmingham to return for the third straight season. Now you're really starting to implement a system, right? You're really starting to get into a groove, and you have some guys that are coming back. Your vets like a DeMarcus Gates, who he understands everything now, so he can be
Yes.
a leader out there. And you've got new free agents who are coming in who bring a lot of talent, but you got to get them up to speed. How important is that for you to be back in the same system, back in Birmingham next season, and you can keep doing what you're doing, and like you said, build upon it and evolve.
You know, I think, like you said, no different than the players. Like they asked a question about Jared and Tizino. It's about familiarity. And that's what it is. In this small ecosystem, that's what you have to look at. You want to be able to hit the ground running defensively. That's the biggest thing. So for us is if having a guy like Gates back, how do we get up to speed quicker with the new guys? Is having a good mix of veterans. Having a good mix of veterans and say, hey, no, this is what this means. Hey, we can do this, and they take the scheme to the next level. That's the biggest thing because I don't care what level you are. Players, they're more comfortable talking to players than they are with coaches. So if you have those type players that can explain the scheme to them and help them get to the next level, then the scheme will come together quicker and it'll be more effective.
Absolutely. Now, Coach, we're about halfway through, so I know we're going to do a little film breakdown segment. And I know fans are always enjoy to get to see the behind the scenes of what a coach looks at while looking at the film. So if you want to pull that up, we can start jumping into it. Guys, I know we've seen some folks in the chat talking about JoJo Tillery. I think we're going to see some JoJo Tillery in this film.
Why wouldn't you see JoJo Tillery? All right, let me see. Let's go through this and get this pulled up. All right, so we went through there, screen share, entire screen. All right, you gotta let me know if we're seeing what we're seeing.
So far, so good.
All right, we have the film,
And there we
and
go.
all right, we're full screen. All right, full screen here. Okay, so just a little bit as we go through this, we'll have about 5 clips. And I know a couple of guys have been on here and they show the defensive clips or whatever and the schemes. The thing I want to be able to show right now is I want to talk about a couple of things. So right now you can see we're up. Scores 23-16. All right, we're up right here. It's in the fourth quarter. It's a minute 10 left. Not sure how many timeouts we have left here or they have left. But this is against Houston this year, and I want to be able to go through it and talk about the uniqueness also of the UFL. I know you guys know it, but we may have somebody on here who don't. But the biggest thing about the UFL is, right now at the end of the game, they have an opportunity to go down and score. If they score, they can go for 1, 2, or 3 points. Okay, they're only down 7 here. They can go 1, 2, 3 points, and then you get that opportunity to go 4th and 12 in lieu of the onside kick. And you talk about us being in with the Brahmas and what was that 23. We were leading the St. Louis Battlehawks forever. And that was the first time that all those coaches had been around it, that 4th and 15, I think it was at the time, or maybe they had just made it 4th and 12, but they go down, they score, they get the extra point, and then they end up getting the onside kick, and then I think they kick a field goal and they actually win that game, and that's all within the last minute. So I want to break that down on what the philosophy is here, okay, and kind of going through that. So if you can see this, let me know. It's still moving. We're good.
Yeah, we're
Everything's
looking
here,
good.
James. All right, so right now I got Okie 2 Robber, okay, so you can see it's a 3-man rush. All right, we got a 3-man rush here, and you can see right now we drop everybody that, underneath we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, then we have these 2 deep, and then we have JoJo Tillery, the robber right there. Okay. So now with this 2 robber, the other thing we want to be able to do is I like to match up. I like to talk about windows, and I like to tell him, hey, you have the 1 window, 1 weak window, 2 weak, 3 strong, 2 strong, 1 strong. That's your window. That's your underneath window. Anything that comes in that area, you have it. Anything vertical, you have it. Anything vertical in your half, you have it. Anything that needs to be robbed from the middle will go to the robber. Okay. So when we look at this and let it play, here's the deal. All right. We're rushing 3. All right. And we're dropping. So we know here's the other thing. They want to play the clock. All right. So it's a minute 10. So we understand when they drop down, let's make sure that we keep them in bounds. Okay. You can see everything. Keep them in bounds. We're ready to go. Everybody should be good here. I'll go through some of these things as well. You can see Tay. Let me know if it gets too glitchy, but you can see, I think this is Tay dropping. The quarterback releases the ball. You can see him. He's already in his plant stick coming downhill. make an open field tackle. Here we are, right there. You make an open field tackle. Okay, so we get it. So right now we go from there. Next one, we still good here, James?
Yeah, we're looking good.
Okay, so now second and medium. Okay, so now here's a couple of different things. It's not just here's the clock. We have 49 seconds on the clock. Okay, but they're also it's still down the distance with them trying to work to get the first down. All right, so let's look here.
And you have the rule in the UFL too, where you pick up a first down, the clock stops, until the
Yeah,
ball is spotted. So
I always say it pauses. Yeah, yeah. So yes, it stopped. Now here it is. So they're trying to work, and like you said, that clock's going to stop here, and it's going to give them a little extra time to get set. So you can see right here, he has the 1 window, 2 window, 3 window, 1 window week, 2 week. Okay. Here's the thing about this play. Okay. Even though in their mindsets, they're playing the end of the game here. Okay. You're playing the end of the game. The situation is not just the end of the game. Like you said, the situation is what? The first down, right? And 2nd and 5 telling you they're going to be intermediate because they want to work the first down. All right. So it's not so much the clock here as it is going to be the down and distance. So this guy here really should be able to hug this up a little bit tighter. He should be clamping 2. He should be clamping 3. Okay. So when you look at it, here we go. All right. So we're good. They end up getting the first down because we're a little too soft there. I have the audio down. You can probably hear Skip cussing there saying we're too soft. Let me see if you can see him down there. I know he's saying it. What are we playing? Bend, don't break.
we need that
All
hot
right?
mic all access.
Yeah, hot mic, Skip. We're playing Bend, don't break. All right. So right now I want to go through these. And so now I want to go through this third one. Okay, they do have the first. So now you look at it. My philosophy or my thought process, 38 seconds. All right. And they're down. All right. If I keep playing 3-man rush, drop 8, they're going to keep checking down. They're not going for that shot. They can't have an incompletion. They can't afford to lose at this point. Okay. So when you see right here, we're trying to put some hands on 2 down at the bottom now, but they have a switch release. Okay. So we end up getting in our new 2 window. We're still in our 1 window. And you can see right now we're in the 3 strong window. Okay. The only thing about this is now Demarcus Gates is he's reading that quarterback, but he is a 2 window player. Okay. And then we have a corner here is a 1 window player. All right. So right now we're overloaded here. All right. Trying to end the game. Of course, he's done it so many different times. Okay. So right now, if he stays over his 2 window, which is that back right here, he doesn't. All right. And this turns into an explosion. So now here's the thing. Let me go back. Here's the difference in the philosophy. Okay. Right now, the ball is on the what? We're probably on the 37, 38. Okay. So right now, don't forget we're playing for a what? We're playing for a touchdown. Okay. Field goal really won't help them at this point. So we know that they're trying to get that TD. All right. Now, an explosive play here, if we were going for the TD, this wouldn't probably be the best coverage because we get an explosive here and all of a sudden, they could be in field goal range pretty quick. All right. So now it's a little bit different. We get it. And we missed some tackles there. I'll pass the missed tackles. Okay. We missed the tackles and they get out of bounds. So that's not a good series for us, or that's not a good play for us. That's not a good mindset for us. We're trying to end the game for sure, but the coverage itself will still play the way it needs to because you can even see here, we're not even rushing, right? So now we've gone to a 2-man rush and just looking for the check down. Now, for the guys that don't know this, I'll show it. This is Perion. I can't tell you, James, if we called it or not, that is Perion. No, but he is a pretty smart player. And what he's trying to do right there was just spy that quarterback. And, I think this is one of the things I want to notice here. This is one of the reasons that he's on the Cowboys 53-man roster. Right here. He's sold out. If you go back and look at his film, even in the preseason, he sold out on each and every last one of them. Right?
And that's what you got to do. If you want to try to make an impact, whether it's making a 53-man roster, getting on a practice squad, you notice it sometimes, guys that are getting older, guys that think they might be done, they might not put 100% on a special teams rep or 100% on trying to chase a guy down. But, that effort, like you said, that's what gets these guys back to the NFL. That's what that's what scouts are looking at.
Remember what I said earlier. It's not about plays played. It's about plays made. So it's not about, I need to play 50 snaps a game to get to the NFL. No, you need to make 6 plays a game. It's not about me playing 50 and I've only made 1 play. It's about me making 6 plays. So if you can give maximum effort, as you're talking about maximum energy on those plays, then that's going to get you to camp. And if you continue to condition yourself that way, then it'll put you on a 53-man roster. But going back to here, all right, so here we are, 23-16. All right, so we can see right now that, they're starting to get in the red zone. Here's the deal. All right, let's look at it. Now their philosophy has changed because it's been checked down Charlie, right? Okay, now look at their philosophy. Okay, it's 30 seconds left, and now they're trying to go for a chunk. Okay, now they're trying to go for a chunk. But before this play ends, I want you to look underneath and understand this. He's one window, he's two window, he's three window, he's 2 weak window. Okay, so go back and understand this. Here's the back. Okay, when that back comes out, right now they switch. Let's let this play. They switch, and you can see that now he takes the new 3, and Gates takes the new 2. So that's pretty good in understanding how our underneath distribution needs to be in terms of our underneath coverage. JoJo's the robber. Anything that comes behind the depth of those 2 underneath defenders, or 2 to 3 underneath defenders, especially those middle guys, he's robbing with eyes on the quarterback. Okay, and that's what you end up with there. All right, so he's good. He sees it. We're too high. All right, we have the 5 underneath with the 1 robber. Okay, they check it down. We here. Catch the ball. JoJo's the worst in the tennis ball drills, but he's clutch when it comes to the end of the game.
Joe from the 4.
Yeah, that's what it is. All right, and that's an excellent job. So balls behind him. Like I said, JoJo's interceptions all come from when he's playing in Houston. So that doesn't mean that he's going to go to Houston. Yeah, and he's hamstrings. So that's why we're like, go down, don't run. We know what happens when you run. So
game is over. The game is over.
Game is over there. And that was real quick there. I stopped sharing it. Let me get back to you guys so you can see my beautiful face. Oh, I can see it.
There we go.
So, yeah, so that's, just that situation right there, it took us about 30 seconds to go through it. But when you're calling those calls and you're making those plays and going through it, 3-man rush, the quarterback has time, and you can see he thought he had enough time to throw the ball deep. That's when you're, that third level has to come into play, whether it's those 2 high safeties or whether it's that that robber being able to read the quarterback, looking for any in-breaking route. So we executed it. We put it in because we hadn't had it in. We've been 4-man rush up to that time, trying to stop everything. So we went to a 3-man rush with that 2 robber, and ended up closing the game for us. Like I said, it was a little softer. It was a bend don't break, but it was about playing the time. Also in that, James, it was also let them run the timeout. So if they do get the 4th and 12, you don't have enough time to do anything with. So the time was a factor.
And that game was an interesting one for you as well, in the sense of Jalen McClendon was, QB3 primarily for that season, right? This was the game where he got promoted to QB2. Nolan Henderson, I think it was Tay Crowder that knocked him out on a hard hit, or
it was Deuce. It was Deuce. It was Deuce that knocked him out and changed the game plan.
Yeah, because then you got McClendon, who comes in, and he's hardly played the last couple of years. I mean, he's back up in DC. You got a little bit of tape, but I'm assuming you didn't watch a ton of McClendon tape heading into this game. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No. I mean, you're just assuming that he's going to run. He didn't run like Nolan did. You're thinking, okay, he's going to be on the run, because this is the same guy. What was he at?
He was at Vegas and DC.
Yeah, but wasn't he at Houston a couple of years ago as well? I remember
no,
Vegas.
He was with the Los Angeles Wildcats back in the 2020 XFL.
Got you. And then 22. Okay, but yeah, I remember him. I know that he was going to Vegas, but the biggest thing about him is you thought he'd run. The biggest thing that he did when he came in is you saw like the 2nd and 5. They'd have some 3rd and 5 to where with the other kid that you mentioned first, that he would respect the sticks. If it was 3rd and 5, you knew those routes would be around the sticks. When McClendon came in, it was 3rd and 5, and there were deep shots.
Yeah.
And we were
Marcus
like, whoa,
Sims
whoa,
over
whoa,
the top.
whoa. Yeah, we were like, whoa, that's not right. That's not right. So that the biggest thing is the tendencies. They broke a lot of tendencies with him in. So it's not so much as watching film on him. Is the OC was able to change his tendencies when he changed the quarterback. That wasn't the game plan. That's not who they had been. And then when we saw him the second time, we kind of knew, okay, this is who you are and what you're trying to do.
Right. Jalen's got one heck of an arm. I think he definitely, he was the turning point for Houston that year, and gave you guys a run for your money a little later on the season. You guys had a stage quite the comeback there against. Honestly, let me jump into that really quick, because that was one of the games of the year. Coming back against Houston down 25-6, a crucial game. With playoffs kind of on the line, week 7.
Wow.
That was a 25-6 McClendon's running into the end zone. He's holding the ball out in front of the fans, and the next thing you know, Jamar Smith comes in, and you guys come back. But what was that game like? Just trying to
What,
adjust
what
and
was the
slow
final?
them
What was the
down.
final on? What was the final on that game?
33-25, I believe.
Yeah, 30. So they didn't score again.
No,
Yeah,
27
okay,
unanswered
gotcha.
points.
So that's always good. Like I said, our job is to hold them, and that's what I tell the guys. Whether it's 12-0 or 12 whatever, our job is to hold them. And I think there were some things that got away from us. I can't recall that game as much, but the biggest things we did hold them enough for skipping those guys to come back. And I think those are the type games because the year before when Tillman was there was a game in Michigan to where the defense stood up. And every now and again, there has to be a catalyst to make you believe. And, for me, being down like that and holding them to a point, we had done that the year before in Michigan, is that has to be a mindset. And that's what I was talking about the guys and the new crew that we had. They had to have that moment. You could talk about it, but like I said, the Tillmans had seen it, the Garvins had seen it, all those guys, the Tazinos had seen that moment to where, hey, we're down. Okay, the offense might have struggled. Let's go out and let's hold them until they get right because we do believe in them. And then they took off in both games. So that's where it was, and I just think that was one of those football moments to have the defense believe that, hey, we have to stop them. Let us step up, and we did.
Hey, Coach, we actually had Jaron Horton in here. He's had a great breakdown. Love the coaching points and seeing how other great coaches teach. And Jaron, if you're still watching, I was talking with Corey before we hopped on live, and apparently you guys are both in Phoenix. So you
Oh
guys might
yeah, I'm in Gilbert. I'm gonna get your number. We're gonna hook up for sure.
absolutely. Hell yeah. Yeah, absolutely love to see that. Coach, I don't want to take up too much more of your time here. Really appreciate you joining. There was one question in here from Jake where he was curious about week 5 against Memphis. That was a game that went into overtime. Dresser win, got his first start for the Showboats, 24-20. Really close game down to the wire. But he just wanted your thoughts on that game and some things you might be able to adjust and learn from.
Well, first of all, I think that was Tizino. I know he had a penalty. He's probably trying to show out for Jaron. That was probably the biggest thing in that game because this is an old coach. Now, other than that, really what you took away from that, Dresser Wynn was a good, he's accurate. I saw some stats on him in L.A. Rams or whatever the other day. I think he was doing pretty good with them as well in the preseason. So it's not like he's a high school kid out, So if I'm not mistaken, there's some things early, and then there was a punt return and some different things that kind of put us back to where, and that's not on special teams. Defensively, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been 18 points or whatever that we held them to. I can't remember, 16, whatever it was. Then we ended up getting to a point where it was a shootout in the the overtime, those overtime rules. And the biggest thing for us is I thought, we lost our cool right there. We lost our cool. We ended up having a penalty, and a penalty was an automatic give to them.
Yep.
So, it was a great football game, but that automatic give. So there's some things that, they did because they did return one. That's a part of football. And then when you look at us defensively, we lost our cool on a time or two. And there's just some things that where, like I said, that's 1 or 2 points. They did score when they get down there. The whole thing is about not letting them don't let them have that. Look at that kick six, but don't let them have that opportunity.
Speaking of that game,
Yeah.
speaking of that game, I know we were talking about Coach Mazzoni a little bit before we hopped on, but he actually, funny story about that is when you guys got that, or when they got the 2-point conversion because of the penalties, he didn't remember or realize that, it was a shootout, three opportunities for each team. He thought they won right there. So he started celebrating, and then the team's like,
No.
Coach, hold up. We still got to score a couple more.
Still got more, still got a couple more, and I think, look at that. Don't remind me. Who was that? Jalen. Yeah, no doubt. But I think the biggest thing is, in those games, it doesn't, regardless of the record, it's about opportunity. Those guys took advantage of their opportunity, and I think, we didn't. And I think, that's something that I don't care. When you have a team that's won championships 3 times, the biggest thing is, I'm sorry, they have to be humbled sometime. And however that happens, until you can learn that lesson to take advantage of every opportunity and don't let your opponent take advantage of theirs. And I think that's a mindset that you have to have. If you keep it close, the football guys will let that game go either way. So don't keep it close. Do your job, and you have to make sure that you're mentally into the game from the beginning to the end, and there are no second chances.
And Coach, obviously there was a lot of talk over the last couple of months on the future of Birmingham. We don't need to get into all of that. But for you to return to Birmingham in 2026, you'll be their defensive coordinator. So you will be back in a spot that you grew up in, that you've lived in, a city that really loves their Stallions football. How excited are you to be back in Birmingham for the 2026 season?
Well, especially with all the talk, the last couple of weeks, your emotions go here. You be like, hey, could we go over this? Am I going to be coaching in this state, this state? And then when you say no, you're back at home. Then it's like, oh, it's good. So it just like anything else, when you talk about opportunity, it's an opportunity that you can't you can't just pass it over. There's an opportunity for me to coach in Birmingham, where my family lives, where I was born. I remember in '83 or whatever it was when the Stallions first came to Birmingham, we were so excited because that's our pro team. So like anything else, it's an honor to coach in Birmingham, and it's also a gift. It's a gift from God because, like I said, I get to spend time with my family in a business where you don't get time to spend. We're in a business where you don't get to be around your family a lot. So I'm excited about it, and can't wait to see what's next for us.
Is there any chance we see you in the shirtless Stallions fan section at some point in the 2026 season?
Yeah, I might walk through there, but my shirt will be on.
Ah, that's
No,
not the answer the fans are wanting to hear, Coach.
well, they want ratings, don't they? They want better ratings.
I guess so. Oh man, Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. This was a pleasure. The film breakdown was phenomenal. Of course, wishing you guys the best in Birmingham this upcoming season. Really glad to see Stallions football returning. Any final thoughts or comments before we wrap things up? Maybe a final message to players or just anybody watching that might just need an opportunity and might be considering the UFL to be their next stepping stone in their career.
I tell my sons, and I've always lived by this since high school. There was a saying on the wall, and it says, "Luck is when preparation meets opportunity." And I think that's the equation. Like even here, look at the opportunity that you've given me today, and the opportunity that you have because of this league for us to, there's so much football going on right now that neither one of us probably would be talking to each other if it wasn't for this league. So it's some connections that you can make. There's a lot of good football players. There's a lot of good coaches. There's a lot of good whatever media people and a lot of good things that this league is doing. So you just got to prepare for when your opportunity comes. And if we get 20K, you have to take your shirt off in the locker room. But yeah, you got to talk to the owner of the league about that. He'll take his off. But it's just about preparing for your opportunity. And that's what this league is about. On and off the field, it gives you players every level, all of us. Like I said, I started as a DB coach. I've been a head coach in the CFL, but DB coach, defensive coordinator, head coach in one of these years coming. That's still a goal. That's what this league presents, is an opportunity for me to do it. There's only 32 NFL teams, 9 CFL teams, so that's 41. So professionally, where else are you going to do it unless you go to Europe? So this is a great opportunity. It gives us everything we need. It gives the fans a chance to see football, in the states that don't have, pro football. And it's just wonderful for all of us. And I think we should continue to support it and spread the news or do whatever we need to do, tweet it, Instagram it, just make sure the hype's around it. This is us, and we talk about building those two teams up. Well, this is the same thing. You're trying to build this league up, to make it set up to be what it shall be, because it's a great space in spring football. We all enjoy it, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Absolutely, Coach. Seriously appreciate you taking the time today, and to everyone who tuned in. I saw we've got around 30 to 40 viewers consistently throughout the show, so appreciate you all tuning in and asking questions and asking Coach to take his shirt off. So we appreciate all of you. You know the drill. Make sure to subscribe. We're usually live every Monday or Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Follow us on Twitter at AroundUFL and on Instagram. And we will see you all next time. Thanks again, Coach.